And so thank you so much, Tommy. Welcome all of you to the Ad Hoc River Committee. We have a rather busy day today, and I thank you for being here. I want to thank Tom for his commitment and dedication to the river corridor and going back to his years of growing up.
That's right.
And so I appreciate all of your passion, your support. Okay, so we have a clock here. Maybe I might have written letters that are very articulate and very thoughtful, but you have a 2-minute limit. So hopefully get to your letters and succinctly to the point, so that way you don't miss that opportunity. We do have some speaker cards on items 2 and 3, so we will be calling those special. But let's start with, unless you have any announcements, or, okay, let's start.
I just want to let you know I'm dressed this way because I was in Cahuenga Peak Ranger with about 44 people from somewhere around the country and the world hiking up to Cahuenga Peak, which is right above Lake Hollywood, and the extension there. It was very nice, so
Great.
Excuse my dress.
No, I feel envious. I wish I was there. Okay, so item number 1.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Mr. LeBlanc. Rafael Operator with the CLA's office. Number 1 relates to DWP quarterly status report relative to its work on Los Angeles River.
Hey, welcome back.
Thank you.
It's good to see you back, and hopefully health is...
It's better. I was in January, I think I got caught by the bug that everyone else was catching. So I feel better now, so happy to be
Good.
back.
Good for you. Thank you for being here, and always thanking Water and Power for their support. Do you have a report for us?
Our pleasure. It's our routine report on the maintenance. Our crews were out there in March. Well, not in March. This is in response to the motion that was introduced in March, and we go out there on a quarterly basis, and they were last out there in November. They have been out there again. That report is not ready. It will be ready for our next meeting, but they are going out on a quarterly basis, just making sure it's nice and clean.
Do you, when they do clean, what's the level of debris? Is there any way to quantify how much they're cleaning and what they pick up? Is there any way that could be determined?
Yes, it can be determined. Our guys have not, sometimes we'll see more or less. In the winter times, it's not as bad, and so they've not seen a lot, and we've not received a lot of calls. We go out on a quarterly basis, and then if we get
I see.
calls as well. So we've not been receiving extraordinary amount. And on my side, I would hear if they were.
Right. I do know that under the right-of-way of the transmission lines, there's a roadway that's used for maintenance, I believe, for work. But they also tend to be used for folks who are walking and just recreational purposes. They're not under the towers, on the side where the roadway's at. There's like glass and debris, and is that the kind of material that they pick up, or is it more like the bulky items?
It's more of litter and that stuff. And then in certain areas, it's there is some large items as well.
Okay.
I know our guys have been monitoring kind of the site, and they've been watching it on item number 2, so they're concerned
Great.
about what that's going to do. So
Fantastic. Well, I want to thank you for your hard work. Callie, also the Nick Demos, who's been supportive as well. So I want to thank Nick. Is he here?
no, he's not here, but
Okay.
this is really his baby, so he sends his regrets.
Well,
But
actually, he knows. We gave him a shout out.
I will definitely let him know.
Okay.
He's probably listening now.
That's what
I was on the river, on the bikeway on the river. I didn't ride the whole ride for the Chinatown Firecracker 500. I just got in Griffith Park. But there's a lot of work that you've done, it seems, on a regular basis on graffiti removal on the columns of the power towers, which is good. But your people don't necessarily go into the river. do
No.
they? Yeah, it's always on the top of the river there
On the side.
on that. And then also at the area down near the Hyperion Bridge, I think you did some extra work, which looked like it was being cared for. But there's a problem. Here's a question we've got to ask ourselves, and I think I have a motion, but it hasn't been answered. Now with the new GSD transfer of General Services Police to the Los Angeles Police Department, when are we going to get assigned regular patrols by what was LAPD, and that they're the same police officers who police our parks or police our libraries and other public facilities. So that's a question to ask. And then also another question, because I thought about this on Saturday, Kelly. Do we want to put, which some facilities have, cameras up there, so if there's some negative activity, at least they see it. So this is a question. Now, some people are opposed to cameras, but I'll tell you, they do have an effect on the constant vandalism, which is money not spent for trees and beautification, but just for maintenance. So, and if any of those are groups out there, and please contact me if you're adamantly opposed to cameras, but if we could get a grant to have cameras, then we have eyes on the river for safety, et cetera, et cetera. So,
Great.
okay. Thank you.
Thank
Okay,
you.
see no cards. Thank you again, Callie, for your hard work. Okay, and there are, we'll note and file this item. So item number 2, we have
Oh, wait,
continued.
where's Kelly? Kelly, last thing I wanted to ask you, I'm going to make a strong run. The Department of Water and Power created a check dam up where the spreading basins were, which are now known as the headworks.
Yes.
It is operational. We want to have a test after the rainy season to get the going. Ed, I'd like to see us put a lot of check dams in the river where it's just concrete. So then two things. One, you checked it, you put water, so there's water that spreads our view there. But two, it gives the opportunity for sanitation to go at certain points and to sift off the trash upstream, as opposed to having it, anybody from Long Beach here? Having it dump all on Long Beach, which is terrible. It's a big sin when there's a big flush. So the more we get out upstream, the better it is. So we want to do a test at the check dam, which is near Buena Vista and the Los Angeles River. They know it. Marty Adams knows it. So if we could arrange that in the next month. Thanks, Kelly. Thanks, Mr.
Thank you.
Ray.
That'd be great. Yeah, I've been advocating for that for a long time, so I'm glad you're pushing it as hard as you are. It's great.
Thank you.
Okay, so item number 2 has been continued from January 28th. Can we read that to the record, please?
Item number 2, motion and Department of Rec and Parks report relative to the establishment of recreational zones along the river.
Okay, we do have a presentation on this matter.
Good afternoon, John Kapitsky from Recreation and Parks. And before we do our presentation, I just want to bring you a brief status since our last meeting. We have held another community meeting to gather comment on the proposal for the river project. And there, in addition to the community meeting, there have been a couple of what I would characterize as notification meetings where we've gone out and spoken to community groups to try to basically alert them to create awareness for the comment meetings. So with that in mind too, I want to bring to your attention that we submitted to belatedly the proposal that has been revised. And one of the things that's been occurring through the commentary process and over the last month is due to a number of different circumstances, the proposal that we have offered has been modified. And today, as we present to you and to the group here behind us, the public, you'll see some modification of the information that we brought you last month. And so as we do this, I think we're going to keep doing this till we get it right, but you'll see some slight modification. We'll kind of bring that to your attention, so we'll also kind of highlight what's different from the last time that we came before you. So without any further ado, I wanted to also mention Walt Young, my colleague here, is going to be my digital assistant.
IT guy.
And so in terms of the overview of the proposal here to utilize the river for a recreation zone, what had been initially a 5-mile span of the river that was beginning at North Atwater has now become a 2.5-mile span that would begin just south of Fletcher. And so that was a result of some bridge construction that would have posed a conflict. So we've tightened the zone, so to speak, and the new area, the definition of it really begins at Rattlesnake Park, which is just on the south side of Fletcher, and moves down south to Egret Park. And as I go through this, I'm going to try to hit the broad overview, and then Walt is going to kind of come in behind me, and he will address some of the detail, particularly about the administration and enforcement. And Walt's from the Mountains Recreation and Conservation Authority, and they will be the ones administering the zone. So they have done quite a bit of work here in terms of trying to design this and lay this out. Okay, so the period, the pilot program period would begin on Memorial Day and on Labor Day. And we picked this period to be consistent with the driest period on the river, so the least flow. And we want to just mention that a lot of the access is an issue here. The access is based on some of these rights-of-way that actually extends from, they're like paper streets that extend down into the river, and Walt is going to be a little bit more specific about that. Okay. The use of the zone would be from sunrise to sunset. And for those people that come down for casual use, there's no registration or user fee attached. But for groups that would come down and have an organized event, there would be potentially a permit process, and the fees from the permit would go towards the administration of the zone. Okay. And then here's our menu of activities. And as we go through this, Walt, again, in a lot more detail, will discuss this, but this is based on the public trust doctrine. So we've got an evolution of this to the point where these activities are based on an entitlement, a right, essentially, to be down in the river. And so we're talking about traversing the area, walking, hiking, fishing, bird watching, and then, as we'll discuss a little bit later in greater detail, the non-motorized boating, so kayaking and canoeing. And in terms of specifically defining the area that we're talking about the bottom of the channel. We're talking about the area where the water is, where the plant growth is, where the vegetation and where the birds are nesting. So the recreation zone really does not incorporate the bike path or the maintenance road, which is on either side, or as he'll tell us, they're really the walls of the channel. It's only that bottom portion that we're really addressing in the recreation zone.
Go back.
Okay, sure. There, a little bit up, and he'll give the detail a few feet up, but essentially, yeah, what's happening down in the river. That's right, and that's been a little bit, I think, of a misunderstanding or something that there isn't a great awareness regarding that. Okay, so these are some of the prohibitions, and this has been in the community sessions that we've had. This has been sort of the subject and the focus of a lot of vigorous comment. And these are based on a couple of things. There's some of these activities that are destructive to the habitat, and then some just cause general safety concerns. So I suspect that we'll hear some comment that will focus on some of these issues today. And as we did this, we tried to focus or kind of gain some of our focus from the norms that we see in our parks and some of the other regional parks and the analogous parks that we have with wildlife areas.
What's the statute of limitations on any of those violations?
A statute of limitations? Right now, none, because they're not enforced.
Good answer.
So we're going to use signage, and we've actually had, and there's a gentleman here today, Mr. Morales, who was present at our community meetings from the HUD program, and he's been working specifically on the signage. The thing that we're really trying to do with the signage, there's multiple directions, but to identify the features of the area, to try to describe the usage that we're outlining, to try to get a sense to the community of not only what they have, but how it's most effectively used. And so there's been a lot of work on that, and eventually that would lead to, we characterize as durable signage because it's not something that's a bulletin or a flyer that somebody's just going to tear off and all of a sudden there's nothing there. But one of the things that became critical in trying to move this forward is that concept of risk. And so one of the things that will be prominently posted is when you enter the recreation zone, you're doing this at your own risk. Okay? And then focusing again just last on the boating here, which is kind of one of the featured activities, and I know a lot of people have as we mention this, the concept of kayaking, we get some looks like, you're going to do what? Down in the bottom of the river, you're going to kayak. And so we're looking at boats that are not motorized, that are steerable, so that we're talking about trying to minimize the impact, keeping in mind also that this is a period of very low flow in the river. You're talking about inches of water. You know, there are some holes or drop-offs where that you're talking about a few feet, but for the most part, we're talking about inches, and that's really the appropriate and functional type of craft that you can put in.
What about bugs? And sometimes, a couple years ago, we had a buffalo gnat, or there was a real stinging fly that was in there, or mosquitoes, or what are some of these challenges health-wise?
Well, that's a vector control issue. I mean, they do address that. There's a fish gambusia that they actually will put into the river to control that, and they do that on a regular, vector control does that as part of a regular program of abatement. So that's part of the answer to that. In the section of the river that we're looking at, that can potentially happen because even though there's flow through there, wherever there's impounded water, you can have that type of thing.
Right.
So I can't say that
Are we going to unimpound any, or whatever the word is, unimpound any of those water ponds? Because I think that's a challenge that we have, Ed. There are some pockets of pools that in this period of time will dry up and be stagnant and then be a catch for animals. Oh, could we look at opening up some of these as they did in the past? I mean, that's a big question, but I think it would be worthy to look at that. But put that in the back of your mind.
Okay.
Both years, you know.
Okay, very good. All right, so what I'd like to do now, I believe we've got the overview completed, so I'm going to turn the presentation over to Walt, and I think he's going to give you some of the underpinnings.
And as he steps forward, I'd like to just reaffirm that this river pocket, this opportunity to have recreational, is in the context of a river. So if this was in any other part of California where you have types of plants that can give you a bad reaction, snakes, anything else, you want to use common sense when you're along or within that river corridor or on the beaches or in the mountains. So it is with that sense of purpose that we want to reaffirm its natural habitat, but also engage the opportunity for our youth and people in general to experience what is beautiful there in its natural state. So it's that common sense that we're going to have to also use. But you're right, Councilman LaBonge, we have to be worried about controlling any kinds of diseases or impacts that could occur because of stagnation. But it's also in the context that it's a natural river waterway.
Chairman, members of the public, Walt Young, Mountains Recreation Conservation Authority. I see a lot of familiar faces, and so we'll do the PowerPoint presentation with a focus on that which is new, and then a brief review of that which is not. Again, MRCA, Joint Powers Authority, we employ park rangers that are generalist park rangers. We basically do all that is required without having to ask for an additional division or person to take care of the task at hand. This slide has yet to be changed. We received a letter, a very positive letter from Army Corps, and they got to the same conclusion using a different route. And so please pass along to Ms. Moriarty that I did make mention of that, because they cited a couple court cases which were different than the public trust doctrine mechanism, but still provided for public access, not surprisingly, subject to the Corps' federal mandate for flood control purposes. But in the final analysis, the destination remained the same, and with some very positive comments from the Corps, which are workable, provides for public recreation during the target period.
Can I just ask a question? I think that was a pretty good sign and verbiage, and I would just request at some points, whether it's at the access points, that both in English and Spanish that be posted. That I think was a very,
as far
yeah.
as the
In English and Spanish.
yes, sir.
Got it.
In the HUD grant, There's provisions for actually interpretive kiosks, multi-sided kiosks, so we'll have plenty of opportunity to tell the tale. In the upper left-hand corner is Fletcher, and that is the jump-off point for the program. There is good public parking along Fletcher. It borders along an industrial area as opposed to residential. Difficult to pick up on the slide. You'll see that there's a turquoise property in the river itself that is owned by the flood control district. And in order to make the program go as simply as possible, the goal was to avoid any real estate transactions. And you'll notice that there is a sliver where there is an uncolored section that goes right into the river. And that's because that is Crystal Street, a paper street that Rattlesnake Park is actually built on, and a city street, public right-of-way that provides for legal access into the river. Marsh Street, which is the purple, surrounded by green, was never intended to be the primary jumping off point. And Marsh Street is surrounded by residential, and one of the goals of the program was to minimize impacts on the neighborhood. And so Marsh will be used for organized activities, whether it be school groups or programs. That parking lot will be opened and closed by an individual. It will not be for general public use, and that helps minimize any impacts on the neighborhood that surrounds Marsh. And that is a major change. As John had mentioned, the reason why is not just one but two bridge construction projects. Fletcher also is going to have additional renovation work within the channel. And
Just a technical question. Why don't we just approve everything but not limit it to when the bridge work is done? Fletcher is halfway done right now if I looked at it. And I'm just saying if we just approve it, but they'd have to come back for a permit, but at least we're here, as long as we're here, because I think it's unbelievably fabulous the work that's been done in North Atwater in that area, and as long as that was the original intent, I would just put it on the table to, since there's construction on these lower bridges that were not there, but at least give us an opportunity in the future.
Well, I'd be remiss if I didn't fully disclose to council members that during the public input process, there was a switch in the program as designed due to that. So as an example, the fairly large public outreach presentation, the amended 2.5 mile program was what was submitted for comments. If we expanded back to the 4.5 miles, I can only imagine we would have to go back through the public process.
Well, ask an attorney if we have to go back. I'm just saying, I would just say, if you're doing all this work now, but just approve it, but say you got to come back at that time. I'm just thinking, if we're all interested in trying to get this thing done, it makes it easier for future steps. Because I can't tell you how many times, if people had vision in the past, it would have made it easier in the future.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, this is one approach.
Because this is new to me. This is news, breaking news, right now.
Okay.
What you told me when you sat down. I was reading it the other way, and that's why when I looked at it.
Okay, so let's take this approach, see how we could, in listening to the advice, if we were to open it up to the 5 or the 4.5, if we were to do that, which is what you're saying at this time, that we currently stick with the integrity of the process, because of the last meetings, we only covered half of that, which is south of Fletcher.
But where is the meeting?
Okay, it was on Riverside Drive,
Elysian Valley.
Elysian Valley. So if we were to do that,
Like last week?
Excuse me?
Like last week?
no, this past Saturday.
The past
Last
Saturday.
Okay, I got it.
Okay, so this meeting was
I
past
saw the
Saturday.
notice. Okay.
So we had that meeting within the 2.5. But we would follow your approach. We would say, we would focus on the larger group, but would not trigger the second half until we had the public meetings to engage the issues on that second half.
Yeah, I just don't want to lose all this work. You know, if you say what Mr. Reyes says, that it's still the intent of this committee to go the whole 5 miles, I'll just call it
Right.
5 miles, but right now, we're only approving this 2.5, is that correct?
Well, that's as the city staff report is written.
Right.
The city staff report is written, but you could alter a city staff report, that's why they have committees, you know? And so then they alter it and say that sometime in the future, that when this bridge work is complete, let's revisit, so you don't have to start from scratch. Maybe you're on second base instead of home plate. You got to cover that. I'm just saying, I don't want to lose all the
But
work.
we would make the commitment to go back out to the community. 'Cause
Yeah.
I would make sure that those stakeholders would feel that they have input to that other half of the 5. So that way they don't feel they're not being part of the process. And then just maintain the integrity of what we're trying to achieve, which is the consensus building process.
Right.
And I think I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that I'm fairly confident in the next few minutes we'll have some vigorous comment from the Atwater community about that. So maybe want to
I understand that.
integrate that in as well.
So hold on to your hat.
I'm not wearing a hat.
Okay.
Overview of Rattlesnake Park, parking which we discussed. Crystal Street is existing parking without restriction and is routinely used for river users. In this section, next to Rattlesnake Park, it typically runs this way year-round. Marsh Park, as I said before, is not going to be used for general access, and we actually further pulled back and made it for organized groups only, permit use. Do have adequate parking there. And again, the section of water to the left, it always looks like this. Quite frankly, it's calm and it's gorgeous and it's wonderful. The bank that you see there is actually owned by a Department of Water and Power, and the city staff report requests that we be provided, we being MRCA, provided a recreational easement for access to the water. Trip continues down to the end. This point, again, per the staff report, 2.5 miles. You exit out about 200 yards from where it turns from natural bottom back to cement. You come up the city right-of-way. Parking is in the lower right-hand triangular location, and we're fortunate during the pilot program period that the bridge is under construction and a superb shuttle program is in effect already. And the way people take these trips everywhere in the state and everywhere in the country is it basically takes at least 2 people in 2 cars. And you go drop a car off at the Home Depot parking lot outside of the neighborhood parking. You drive up to Fletcher, drop off the second car, launch your boat, come back down. You'll exit out at the Star there, hook around to Oso Park, which we also own, catch the shuttle, go back to Home Depot, pick up your car. We've asked also in the staff report that the Department of Transportation establish a loading and unloading zone on Fletcher, about 150 feet, so that you can then meet your buddy, load your stuff up, and go back to Fletcher to pick up the second car. I know it sounds hard. It happens every day, everywhere where people engage in these water activities.
Ranger, I have a problem with Fletcher because it's a pretty quick street. There's an off-ramp from the 2 freeway, there's an on-ramp for the 5, another off-ramp. There's limited parking, there's no parking on the bridge. Is there any way where you did such a wonderful job and built that little park near the transmission tower, is there any way we could reserve parking there, and then they would have to carry it across the street into this Rattlesnake Park?
Not in the 90 days remaining from today to when the program is supposed to start.
I don't understand that. I mean, all you're doing is talking to DOT and saying this is where you should park. I just think Fletcher is dangerous. If you're unloading something on Fletcher, your butt is in the street and you may get hit. So if we own property, whether it's the river or the MRC property, which is in the cul-de-sac up there, I think we should look at that because I don't believe Fletcher is the answer because it's a speed street, you know?
This is Fletcher as you see it now. Currently,
That's Fletcher. Where's that Fletcher? That's not Fletcher.
I'm sorry, Riverside. You know, I meant to say Riverside. Riverside is the takeout point. And Riverside,
Calm.
Riverside is city.
I got Riverside here. I'm talking about Fletcher,
Okay.
where you
At
start.
Fletcher, under the bridge, there is unrestricted weekend parking. And DOT has somehow determined.
I don't think there's any parking under the bridge, and I know it pretty well. I drive it pretty well. What I would just ask, if you go out on your way back to the ranger station and look at the area, and we could post, if you know the area, adjacent to the river, north of Fletcher, it's chain link fence. You could post anything there, your loading zone for that. Where do you enter? Where are you going to enter? They can even walk down the bike ramp into the river there. I would not approve anything that dealt with Fletcher Drive. I think it's unsafe, more unsafe than any other thing that's there.
Just as a quick note, they have met with Council District 13, so they are going to be working with them on that, on Fletcher and Riverside.
I got that, but I would tell you, we're fools. And I don't know if anybody here agrees with me here, but I know Fletcher Drive, and it's not a...
Is it a fair assumption that CD13 will offer a strategy and a
Well, I
plan?
got a strategy right now for the Ranger.
Oh.
You got land right there, and you got the river and the core, we could do that. I'll go out with you if you need to look at it. I'm just thinking, all you're doing is talking to LADOT, and they could post it. I would not put anyone on Fletcher Drive, period. Especially offloading something,
Point well taken.
you know, so...
Point well taken.
That's a picture of Fletcher there. It is, okay, I mean, again, it's a city process, and we're a service provider for this program if it's approved.
Right, and the shades are approved, so... I know, but I just think it's a real hazard.
As far as level of service, basically for the 90 days, and again, the pilot program, the program itself, not just the the kayak program, is written in the city staff report as 90 days only. In other words, the Army Corps kayak window became the pilot program's window. So I just want to make sure, again, everyone understands that this has a sunset date of a pilot program on Labor Day. LAPD, LA Fire Department, again, they retained their municipal public safety duties and responsibilities. But basically, as an agency, we've been asked about this program, and we support it. And for 90 days, we will be redirecting resources in order to make it successful. Currently managed up at Big T. And I'll breeze through this because there's no change. We have park rangers, we have a fire crew. Mountain bike unit has already been patrolling over the winter, limited winter that we've had, 4.5 inches of rain, during rainy season in order to keep people out of the river. And lastly, as far as the discussion about public safety, and this is how I view things, just personally, right now, people are using the river. It doesn't take much to go down there on a weekend. And so the discussion of if you invite people down, people are going to be put at risk. The fact of the matter is people are going down in basically an unregulated manner. And although I'm all about recreation, I'm also about regulation. One of the advantages of having the MRCA ordinance attached is that then any California peace officer, and you can read that LAPD or Fish and Game, can enforce the park ordinance. And I think I'm going to end there. Lupe, would that be correct? Don't need to go through the signage?
We can have Luis Morales, who's right here, kind of just,
Outstanding.
okay.
Good afternoon, Councilman.
Good to see you.
Everybody hear me?
Yes,
I think this is on.
just a little bit closer to you.
Okay, as Walt and John mentioned, as part of our HUD grant, our HUD grant is a 5-point plan that we're looking at, and part of that includes signage. Signage is a very small component, but since we have the opportunity now to look at signage, as with any program, you need to have signs in order to put in place regulations and the do's and don'ts on what kind of activity you can have at these locations. Now, the types of signage that we're looking at are twofold. There we go. It's a little slow. We're looking at two types of signs, permanent signage and temporary signage. The temporary signage that we're going to look at this particular location is going to entail all the do's and don'ts, what kind of activity is limited, what you can do within the river itself. Now, the difference between permanent signs and temporary signs is that the temporary signs are going to coincide with the pilot program. There's going to be two types of signs that are temporary signs that we're looking at. One's going to be signs that's going to be placed within all the parks that have all the rules and regulations regarding the parks. And then the second temporary sign is going to be one that's going to contain all the rules and regulations and the liability, as Walt mentioned, as to when you go onto the river itself. Now, part of our process as we go through this, and the slide's not cooperating, part of the process. You guys have mentioned that there's the purpose of our signs is to protect the area, make sure that the visitors that come to take advantage of the pilot program know where to park. As Councilman LeBlanc mentioned, parking is very crucial, and we want to make sure that the people who come to visit the river and the parks don't go into the neighborhoods and cause mayhem and havoc. So we want to make sure that people know which way to go. Also, the signs provide an opportunity for everybody to know what the rules are and regulations, and it gives our law enforcement an opportunity to actually enforce these rules. Now, the temporary signs, as I mentioned, there's two types. The first one is a general liability sign that's going to go in all the parks within the zone. That's going to identify all of the do's and don'ts and the regulations and rules. And the second sign is going to be a liability sign that pertains to the entrance to the river. The idea here is that we want to engage the community in the area to get involved with looking at the types of signs, the design of the signs, the size of the signs, and so forth, and the location of the signs. We're in a very short time period here in the sense that we have to complete these signs by Memorial Day, and we targeted May 17th as the day when these signs actually get installed into the ground. So we have a very short time frame to look at the signs, look at the content, work with the various agencies who are involved with sign regulations. So it's very crucial that we're in a very short time frame to make sure that we get these signs completed. Now, the next slide, hopefully it pops up, is going to show you some examples of what the signs can look like and the types of signs that we're talking about. The first one would be the signs that are going to go at all the parks. That'll have all the rules, the regulations that are put in place for the entire recreational zone. The second sign would be the signs that are going to go pretty much at the river access. These will be put along the gates where you actually go from the park into the river itself. It's going to contain liability issues or restrictions or... There we go. These signs will be placed along the gates that separate the bike path to the actual access to the river. And the idea here, again, is to reiterate that there's liability issues contained with going into water, engaging in water activities. I want to make sure that the public is fully aware. As the councilman mentioned, we are looking at putting these signs both in Spanish and English. And ultimately, once we get through this pilot program and we continue with the permanent signage, the permanent signage is going to be multi-face kiosk type signs that are going to contain all the do's and don'ts, maybe some history of the area, so that people get more acclimated to the program and to the actual zone itself. Right now, as was mentioned by John and Walt, we narrowed down the actual location or the length of the boating program from Marsh Park or from Rattlesnake Park all the way to Egret Park. So we want to make sure that once we put everything in place, we have a pretty uniform district that's going to encompass also that water village area. So, as I mentioned, we're on a very short time frame. Right now, our focus is on the temporary signs because of the pilot program kickoff. So, we want to make sure that we are out there with the community, engaging them and seeing what they want to see, what they don't want to see in terms of signage, the temporary signage, and ultimately, as we engage further into our HUD program, we will also engage them in the permanent signage for the area.
Could you put something up at the Sunny Nook Park, which is Sunny Nook Bridge, which has access from Griffith Park? It's a bridge, and then a bridge from Atwater at Sunny Nook Park, and then also at the Hyperion Bridge. Instead of saying 6 to 7 signs, whatever the study is, I think you should use those because they're pretty trafficked areas.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, so we're in the very preliminary study area, so that's part of the engagement where we're going to look at the community and see what it is that they want to see and don't want to see in terms of design, size, location. And we did undertake a bike path tour recently to get an idea where these placemaking signs or way-making signs can go, and to get an idea of how many we're going to need and how effective it could be. So hopefully, as we go through this process, we get through the temporary signage component, and then after we get through that process, we focus more on the permanent signage. We'll also take into consideration the wording and the language in the temporary signage into the permanent signage as well. Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
That concludes it? Okay, well, thank you, sir. Thank you for your support, and I'm sure more questions will arise as we go through this meeting. We do have some comment cards. And I'd like to ask the following if they can come to the table. There's 3 chairs. Marion Dodge. Can we pass one of the microphones over? I believe it's Callie, B-L-A-N. Blanquet, please come on up. I didn't want to butcher your name. And Omar. Come on down, Omar. Okay. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, council members. I'm Marion Dodge, Friends of Griffith Park. And Tom, we're looking forward to the year when Atwater will be included in the program. And I mentioned last time I was here that the section that identifies North Atwater Park needs to identify it as being in part of Griffith Park. It's on page 3 and also on the map on page 12. And then also, we had a question about people kayaking. Will they be allowed to stop on some of the sandbars, or are they required to stay in their boats? Because we're concerned about disturbing the birds and the wildlife that are in the river. So if someone can... And I understand the Army Corps is looking into whatever their policy is on that.
Right. I don't know if we have an answer for you on how they're going to treat the sandbars.
Walt said they're looking into it.
Okay, good. Good. Okay, well, thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you very much.
And how do we deal with that? That's a very important point that you make there. Right now, that area gets wiped out when there's a rain. And we have our cleanup with the Friends of the Los Angeles River coming up, so people walk through that. I don't know how it's a protected zone, because that's a tough question, you know?
Something to keep in mind.
Yeah.
We'll get an answer to that eventually. Okay, Callie?
Hi, thank you for the opportunity. My family's been living in Atwater Village for the past 16 years in North Atwater, and we regularly walk the river every day on the riverbed itself with our dogs. We used to hike in the park all the time, encountering Councilman LaBonge with his football, and we save gas and money, and we stick to the river now all the time. So we're really concerned about the dogs and pets ban at the riverbed, and don't understand the rationale about that. If we are allowed to take our dogs into Griffith Park itself, why can't we take it down into the riverbed, which in our area is actually, as she stated, part of Griffith Park, which we shouldn't be excluding anybody from, especially dog walkers. So is there a rationale?
I think we're going to discuss that a little bit, but I don't know. I think that's a good point. See, if a dog goes down there and a dog sees a duck, a dog's going to do what a dog does, but who do we want to protect, the dog or the duck?
Well, I think the rules are that you need to be able to control your dog. So, we're talking about dog owners.
Also,
who
the
can
dog
control
has to go to the do, whatever you call it, and the do's there, is that an issue? Because we are...
And dog owners should be picking that up. And since we've seen more rubbish bins with the development of North Atwater Park, that makes a difference if there's just a few rubbish bins around.
Right, trash cans.
Yeah.
Well, then maybe the ranger could come back up afterwards. Well, afterwards, ask the question about, what do you do in your other creeks? Can a dog be in the Malibu Creek?
Okay. Well, let's do this, Councilman LaBonge. Let's do this. State your questions. I don't want to have a dialogue because you have 2 minutes. So,
My question, what's the
but the
rationale?
question is, lay them let's lay down your questions, let's hear you out, and once we conclude the public comment, we can have answers for you. But I appreciate that. Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you. You're welcome. Yes, sir.
Omar Brownson, Executive Director, LA River Revitalization Corporation. We previously supported access to this stretch of the river for recreation. We have subsequently added some additional language requesting in the administration and enforcement section that the LA River Revitalization Corporation work with businesses and nonprofits to provide mobile amenities such as boat rentals, food and beverages to day use users, and that also the corporation be allowed to provide special permitted events as part of an educational program to support the goals of the revitalization of the river. Further, in the user fee sections, that the River Corporation be exempted from the MRCA administration use fees. So those are three things that we've submitted in writing and further request today.
Okay.
When do we answer that, Ed?
Well, I'm going to have a look at the letter first, and
Good,
and we'll
okay.
get an answer to that. But we just got the letter right now.
Yeah.
Have you had it? Okay, so do we have?
Comments, we have comments. We're collecting all the comments first.
Okay, good. Karen Flores, come on up. Andrea Ventura. And Helene. Helena. Okay. There's another chair for you, ma'am. Okay, Karen Flores.
Hi, I'm Karen Flores with Friends of the LA River. So Friends of the LA River does support the recreational zone for Atwater Village. My first comment is that there have been 2 meetings for the first proposal and 1 meeting for the revised proposal. What happens if people had given their comments after meeting 1 or 2 or based on the document, and then the change happened after? So we have a Facebook, a Twitter, a mailing list. I'm willing to help with the outreach. But I didn't find out about it until I saw it on KCET. We do think fishing is possible, even if boating is not, due to bridge construction. I know it may be harder to monitor, keep people out of certain places and allow them in certain places. But I'm assuming, and I'd have to look it up, that Hyperion Bridge is going to start having some work done on it in the future. So you may be playing whack-a-mole with the bridge work over the years, and people are fishing there now. And I know that the MRCA patrol is valuable and helpful, and I'd like to see it in the full zone. I know it's a tricky maneuver to facilitate that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, my name is Andrea Ventura. I'm here again. I was at the January 28th meeting. I'm a resident of Atwater. I live a block from the river, and I take my dog down there. I am against the prohibition of dogs. I think it is unfair and unjust to invite kayakers in for the enjoyment and use of the river and then take away the enjoyment and the use of the river of residents and visitors that have been doing it with their dogs for decades. There is a legal notion of a prescriptive easement or adverse possession, which I believe applies. So I think if you're going to operate that, there's got to be a strong legal justification for not having dogs in there and I would like support for all that. So I would like to know which entities, given there's about 8 to 10 different federal and state, county, and city entities, have recommended against the prohibition of dogs. And I would also like all the studies and justifications for such prohibition. On top of it, I feel that there's a lack of transparency here. This program has been in the works for a year and a half. The Atwater neighborhood was not made aware of it until January, and then you are going to decide on it. And then on top of it, I went to the Saturday presentation of this where they changed it to be down on the Fletcher Drive. And now you're saying, no, let's go back and vote on it. And 2/3 of the people that were there were from Atwater Village because they were very concerned. And they're still concerned regardless of whether it's outside of Atwater or not. But at the same time, if you're going to vote on Atwater Village when everyone is now thinking it's been changed, I think that you need to be a little bit more clear with everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Could I ask you something, Counselor? Name the book. 4 legs good, 2 legs bad.
Don't know it, sorry.
Animal Farm. God, I thought that was an easy one. Did anybody remember that? I thought that was, okay, anyway.
That was grade school, so it's been
All
a
right.
while.
Oh, God. All right. I was just trying. Okay.
Helena?
Elena Salamajo, Atwater Village resident. I attended both meetings that were held in our area within the last few weeks. I asked at the first one a simple question. What agencies, what have endorsed it for wildlife? Especially when we had a kayaker there who was told how many places had been shut down to kayaking due to adverse effect on the environment. And as Mr. Lamonge has noted, it is already difficult enough for the wildlife to survive there just due to the rains, the off-leash dogs, coyotes, whatever. I was told, I asked for the names of the agency. I wasn't given that. They said, well, we don't have a formal approval. I said, can I have the names of the informal people? I didn't receive that information. I didn't get the names of the agencies or the people. So my question is, who approved it? Or who saw it? Who made comments? I'd like to know.
Okay.
And the last comment I have, I guess, if you turn it into a recreation zone, you can have it without wildlife. It could be just, I guess, concrete water swimming pool. And all the wildlife can go the way of the frogs. We'll never see one again in our lifetime. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, that concludes public comment. Can we have our ranger, our city family come on forward? And
Just before you leave, I truly believe the frogs left when the water came. And the water came from treatment plants, whether it's Sepulveda or whether it's a Glendale, Los Angeles plant in North Atwater. Once the water came, it transformed. I, as a child, Ed, as a child, do you remember frogs?
Tadpole.
And once the water came, and I think once, and amazingly, once the water got better and you got pressure, Adele, and the Bureau of Sanitation, to clean the water up, life came back to the river. So there's all kinds of challenges. These are very good points. I'm also a dog guy. I understand dogs and the importance, so I think we have to look at that. The Santa Monica Mountains is protected environmentally better than we are. Anybody hiking Runyon Canyon here? It gets whipped by the dogs. I love the dogs and the people, but at the same time, you can't do that, what they do in Runyon in the state park. Is that correct, Ranger?
California State Parks prohibits dogs in the backcountry, only in the front country
Right.
as far as parking lots.
Right, but since we're in an urban area, we got to look for this solution, because the barrister from North Atwater who spoke, that's tradition for people to walk on the river with dogs. So, and when I was involved early on the bikeway system, the bikes were supposed to be on the freeway side to not interfere with the horses or the dogs on the neighborhood side in North Atwater. This is a long time ago, Doctor.
Let's give, we heard several comments, and I want to make sure we get to at least some of the answers in terms of where does this come from and the rationale behind it. From what I understand is that with working with Santa Monica Conservancy, a state agency who oversees and basically is our steward in many of our natural facilities throughout California, that there are certain rules they go by given the sensitive nature of these corridors and these locations, the beaches, the mountains, and the rivers. So, and help me out here, because I'm basing this given on previous statements and previous meetings.
Right. Well, the planning process for the rules happened over several months, and California Fish and Game was at the table. Army Corps was at a variety of meetings. I don't remember specifically if it was when we discussed rules, various city departments, and ourselves. And the discussion came up about dogs. You know, as a park ranger, my life revolves around equestrians, cyclists, and dogs. That's the big three. And dogs are a very emotional subject. And this is a difficult issue. It's difficult because the testimony about people historically walking their dogs, either on leash or off leash, we heard both at the public comments. That's historical use. Obviously, it's not lost on the committee members that all the testimony about all the dog walking on leash and off leash, the off leash flies in the face of your municipal code about dogs must be on leash. As far as people being in the water or around the water, that flies in the face of the regulations that have been in effect up to this point. But nonetheless, it's what people have traditionally did. So the conventional wisdom for all the regulatory agencies around the table, of which MRCA is not a regulatory agency, we're strictly here to help piece this together, was that dogs, as Councilman Labange, as you'd mentioned, dogs naturally do things around ducks and birds. They bark at them. We heard testimony that, well, my dog goes down there and it barks at the birds, but you know what, the birds come back tomorrow. That type of statement does not sit well with California Fish and Wildlife Service, as an example. Particularly, the narrow window also contains some bird nesting windows, and so it's difficult. And that's why, quite frankly, I was relieved when, due to bridge construction, that area was excluded. But that's how we got that rule. It was group consensus. It is true that Fish and Wildlife Service, Army Corps, their wildlife and biologist sections have not given us written statements saying dogs are prohibited. It has been discussion, but the flavor of that discussion was that they felt that dogs down at the water would be potentially disruptive for wildlife and could trigger processes that would make a pilot program this year impossible.
Okay.
And I'd like to
Please.
contribute what informed my input into the process. I had spent many
Give us
years
your name
of my
and-
career working over at the Sepulveda Basin.
Please give us your name.
John Kapitsky, Recreation and Parks.
Yes.
So in my 14 years at the Sepulveda Basin, I looked for a parallel for something that was comparable to this type of situation. And I found that in the Wildlife Lake. This is the area that's adjacent. I know you've had a vigorous discussion lately about the area that was cleared, and this is the wildlife area that's directly across Burbank Boulevard from that particular area. It's
In
considered
Sepulveda Basin.
in the Sepulveda Basin.
Not Henry Bielison, Mr. Bielison. Anthony Bielison, yeah.
Right.
Right.
It's not actually in the park named after him, but it's in the area joining the cricket fields and the Tillman Reclamation Plant. At any rate, so we have a wildlife lake there. So it's a body of water. It's basically functions as a migratory rest point for waterfowl, but there are some that are resident, so they're there year-round. And this is an area where dogs have, for the long term, have been prohibited both on and off leash. And the purpose was precisely the issues that you've heard about, was the inability for the dogs and the wild waterfowl to coexist.
But would you say most of these people drive to that park or walk to that park?
I would say that most of them drive.
Okay, now our challenge, Ed, is both in Elysian Valley and in Atwater and North Atwater, is their back door is the river.
Right. And we recognize, and I think we acknowledge, there's a traditional pattern of conduct, and that exists. I don't think we can deny that. But we're trying to balance here the ability to share the river in a functional way, to execute the program, to open this process up, and there's always going to have to be a process of compromise. And
All right, here's the first compromise.
Sure.
I take off my north area thing since I listened to some public testimony. I do think the whole river should be developed, but at this time, since there was two community meetings, I'll take that off. The only thing I don't want is on Fletcher. I really am adamant about Fletcher. We'll find another place to park off of there, but I cannot.
City desire?
with it. Yeah, we'll work with Zachy over at DOT. But the other issue here.
And City 13.
Yeah, absolutely. But also the other thing that I want you to look at, what about the interstate? The interstate's right next door. The noise, I think, if there was a bird person here who knew that, what difference does the freeway make to the life of the birds that a dog would,
Well, I can tell you, Tom, the Audubon Society did do a survey, and they identified a large number of species that are found within that corridor, both waterfowl and other types of animals. So you're right, you would assume because of the freeway you wouldn't have that type of presence, but you do.
I got it. So what would the dogs do? How big is the challenge with the dogs? Meaning, there's an existing environment, and how pristine are we going to make this river? That's the question.
Well, I think there's two factors that weigh heavy in my mind. One is that we have that condition now, but now that it's going to be open to the public and it's be publicized, but it'll be managed and monitored, does that mean we're going to have a higher volume of people coming with more dogs? And what does that do to the balance of the existing habitats? How sensitive is it now? How fragile? And if we increase the volume of people, what will it do? No one really knows yet. But that, I think, is a concern I'm hearing from how dogs do not coexist with waterfowl.
But I think our biggest challenge is if it's a bigger challenge, is the guys in the hot pants who ride the fast $1,500 bicycles on the bikeway through the neighborhood of the bikeway. There's a lot of challenges. The greatest thing about the river bikeway in Elysian Valley it brought the people out onto the river. I think that made access to the river, so the access is there. The bikes speed through there. I almost feel like we should drop the bike if we could, Colonel. And I know you're not a colonel, but you know what I'm saying. If you drop the bikeway down in the bank just to get out, it's going to be so popular, we got to do it right is what I'm saying. But I think dogs are people too when it comes to nature, and we got to balance that out. It's different. Is it the dog do we're not for, or is it disturbing the waterfowl? I don't know. What's the value?
My personal opinion is all the above, but this is not my personal opinion. This is the process with all the regulatory agencies hashing out what the rules would be that everyone could sign off on, and those were the rules that came up.
Can you walk a dog on the beach in Southern California with a leash?
Depending, but mostly not.
How about in Los Angeles? Does anyone know you're a Los Angeles guy?
You're talking about
In Los Angeles, Venice Beach, if you walk a dog with the, I haven't been to Venice Beach in a long time. You cannot walk a dog on the beach.
No.
It's against the law. Two beaches you can?
Rottweiler and up north, Sycamore Cove. That's it.
So they're state beaches. Thank you. Okay.
Okay. So we have to make a decision, a recommendation, Councilmember.
Right.
And there's a series of recommendations that we have. The issue of where do these rules come from, I appreciate your response because you've given us a list of all the different agencies that have met to get to this point of understanding the direction. We did have a couple of meetings in the public, one last Saturday, to engage some of these issues.
We actually had three.
Can you say that in the record?
We had.
Please give us your name.
Lupe Vela, Policy Director. We had a meeting in January. We had ad hoc River Committee where we discussed the issue. Then we had the meeting on the 23rd, and this is the fourth meeting.
The fourth meeting, including the one last Saturday. Okay, so we are not trying to do this behind closed doors. We're trying to be transparent, given the amount of time that we have, and we are being very clear as to who's involved and what agencies are partaking in the discussion. So at this stage, Councilman, we do have some directives that allows us to move forward as far as our actions. And
Can I revert my study area? Do we still want to continue to study the area but not put threat to what the community at two meetings on has discussed? I could pull that from the table. That was one thing I was trying to do, but I'll pull it back. Okay? And the other thing I was going to pull back
Well, whatever, look,
was Fletcher Drive. You got to get off Fletcher Drive. So,
because I just want to make clear, so where are you? I'm trying to understand where you're at.
on Fletcher Drive, I don't want any offloading on Fletcher Drive. It's too fast of a street. There's two on-ramps on either side. There's a bridge that doesn't allow any parking. You could step out the street and get clipped. Because if you have something, you got to turn it, etc. So I'll work with you to get, in the 13th district, to get space adjacent to the river where, excuse me for pointing, where the tower is. You know where the tower is? Your little,
Yes.
it's a little park there that may work for you there, and get them off there. I support that.
All right.
I do not support my idea anymore because of public testimony. They went through a process on North Atwater, and they are going to work on the Hyperion Bridge by 2019 or something. It's still a ways away, but let's get this one going if we could get it going. I do believe, though, dogs on
We're back to
leashes should walk.
2.5, right? Tom?
Excuse me?
We're back to 2.5.
Yeah,
Original.
right, with the original. I rejected that based on
Okay.
public testimony does make an importance, so I wanted to let you, I hear you. Okay, so the other thing too is on the dogs. What would you allow? What would you not allow? Can I walk a dog with a leash on the top of the river?
Yes,
Bank?
and it's an excellent question and one that's commonly misunderstood. The recreation zone only includes the river bottom, as in the ordinary low water mark.
Okay, now, here's the wings of the river right here, and my shoulders right here are concrete, but the water's right here, right by North Atwater where these folks live. There's a long stretch of concrete, a beautiful pour back in 36, that came right there. Do you understand where that is? Because they walk that far low, because that's where you walk down sometimes. But they don't want you in the river, so you can't go in the river. It says Mary Rodriguez right there. I'll put it on you, Mary. Okay.
Thinking about the
So,
concrete.
the concrete wings on the bottom. There's no dirt, there's no gravel.
Right. No, the ordinary low water mark
Uh-huh.
to the ordinary high water mark approximately. And again, depending upon the legal theory, just read that 2 to 4 feet above the level of where the water is in the summertime. So the vast majority of the cement channel would not be part of, say, 2/3, so we're spitballing here, okay? 2/3 is not considered in the recreation area. Bottom 1/3 to 25% from the water up would be. So we really are discussing that area where this is, elevation above where the water is, 2 to 4 feet on a, right angle triangle, so I'll go back to high school geometry, in order to determine where the regulatory area would be.
Right.
So really, it's down by the water. It's not the bike path. It's not the access path where, again, people aren't supposed to be in the first place per Los Angeles Municipal Code.
Uh-huh.
It's not the vast majority of the cement trapezoidal channel. It's down where the dogs could, in my personal opinion, I'm not an ologist, okay? Smarter people as far as determine actual wildlife impact, but it's really down where the water meets the cement shore.
Okay.
Okay, so the roadway, the bike path
There's 14, 16 parks along the bike path.
as well. There's
From Griffith
14,
Park
16
to
parks.
Down to Egret,
Okay.
including the new one, Sunny Nook, and Atwater, the new one.
But we're not
Dogs
going
are
to
allowed
do
with
that
leash.
now, right?
Those are allowed where you can have dogs on leash.
On leash.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So let's take the actions. These are the recommended based on staff input, based on community meetings, based on regulations and rules, and based on the fact that it allows us to move forward now. It allows us to open up this window and learn from this experience, because whatever we do today and in this next phase, we can learn from this and improve upon it. And there will be, God willing, another season where we can approach this again if everything lines up the way they could, and maybe have an amendment or a change at that time. So that's the way the process can unfold So let me allow this to be read into the record, and you can say yea or nay on these, Councilmember. So these will be the actions. Move to council for approval of program concept and management contingent on county and other public agencies' approvals as noted in the letter from Recreation and Parks. That's the first action. Two, recommend no dogs in channel except on leash, on path, and adjacent parks, 14 to 16 parks. Three, MRCA to work with CD1, CD4, and CD13, initiate a community advisory group to review policies and efforts for this pilot program. Representatives should represent the target area. Four, submit the information received to city attorney for their review and opinion as to form. Five, instruct all city departments, including Planning, Department of Transportation, Sanitation, Bureau of Engineering, LAPD, Department of Water and Power, to provide assistance in expediting any requests for the implementation of this pilot program.
You got record parks in that?
Yes.
Okay.
And six, move forward the motion and these recommendation actions to City Council.
Okay, good. The only thing I'd want to say is, this is the thing I'd like to ask, since it's a trial program, the different classifications, I'd like some warnings issued to the community on some of the enforcement. You know, I don't want
As is our practice.
Yeah, but how many warnings you give somebody? Because you know everybody well. If you're out there the same range or see the same faces.
Well, ironically, typically for a new area, the warning period is about 90 days.
Good, so a 90-day warning period. All right, I'm happy. 90-day warning period with a...
However...
I'll do 90-day warning period.
Right.
I'll do it.
However...
Oh, come on, Walt, you're too honest of a man.
However, before everyone gets excited behind me, obviously, public safety and blatant disregard after personal notice
Right.
and a personal warning, that is not a get-out-of-jail-free card for 90 days.
Got it. I got it. But I want to have some sensitivity to that because it is a neighborhood on that.
Okay. So do we have a second on those actions?
All right, and does my retraction not impede your efforts to try to do this year, right? You asked me to, the only thing we got to figure out is Fletcher.
Right, and I don't recall if there was language in there specifically because I need a statutory authority. Did I miss that?
Yeah, the first one was the
Move to council for approval of program concept
and management contingent upon county.
and other public agencies' approval as noted in the letter from Recreation and Parks.
But it does specifically, if passed by council, give the MRCA ordinance and the MRCA management authority over this section?
Yeah, and the resolution that's going to proceed from that would do
But
that.
I'm sure the city attorney's going to look at this and hopefully they'll see it
Yeah.
right.
But the resolution will give you that.
All right. And it
Directive.
basically mirrors our management along the city right-of-way on the overlooks.
On the Mulholland, right away.
Yeah,
We copy that,
It is the same exact principle, so that's been thoroughly reviewed by city attorney and should not hopefully present an issue.
Right. Okay, so we have a second?
Second.
Okay. So that'll be the action of this committee. Again, thank you for your patience, all of you, and all your hard work, and we're going to try to learn from this experience and improve upon it. So
And I
thank
think
you for
that
your
should be an
patience.
extra thing I want to throw in there, that this should be documented and a report at the conclusion of this 90-day period back to this committee.
We'll add that as an amendment.
Yeah.
Okay. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Okay, item 3 for the record.
Item number 3, motion Perry Labange relative to the eradication of loss of habitat in San Fernando Valley, Sepulveda Basin.
Okay. Who do we have here for item 3? Good afternoon. Welcome. Good afternoon, gentlemen.
Good afternoon, sir.
Who would like to go first?
So, sir, I'm Lieutenant Colonel Alex Durrani. I'm Colonel Toy's deputy commander.
Good to meet you.
Good to meet you, sir. And this is David Van Dorp, the deputy district
Good to see you
engineer.
again.
I'd also like to mention that we have Mr. Wieshoff and Mr. Ohlenkamp in the back, both from the San Fernando Valley Audubon Society.
And he is here today?
They are both here.
Welcome.
Right there today.
Thank you for joining us this afternoon.
So Colonel Toy wanted me to express his regret for not being able to be here with you today. He had a Department of the Army directed human resources assignment he got called away on for about a month. So you have me today, sir.
Okay.
First, I want to thank you for inviting us to report on the recent events at the 48-acre area, the Sepulveda Dam flood control basin, specifically south of Burbank Boulevard. I've made a few prepared remarks, sir, pending the time I have, but I wanted to mention up front, this is...
You have more time. As long as we can hear what you have to express, I think it's important.
Great, sir. Appreciate it. I do want to mention, these are our impressions, our opinions on what happened. We've worked pretty closely with our environmental partners and other members of the local community to address their concerns and rebuild a relationship of trust and mutual understanding. However, we're not always going to see eye to eye. And where our partners disagree with us today, I just encourage them to raise their insights, and we, as always, will respectfully re-examine them to gain a more accurate perspective. First, gentlemen, a small recap of the events that initiated the concerns. I believe it was approximately 22 December when the Audubon Society held their Christmas bird count in the Sepulveda Basin. And it was at that time and I think it's fair to state that they were shocked, outraged, and deeply saddened to see that, with the exception of most of the mature trees and the vegetation in and near Haskell Creek, that the Corps had felled and matted the vast majority of the vegetation in the 48-acre. As Colonel Toy presented, I believe it was last month at a meeting here, this vegetation removal was only the very first step of the larger vegetation management project. This part of the Sepulveda Basin was redesignated a vegetation management area in 2011, and we would be replacing the invasive non-native vegetation with a sustainable oak woodland grasslands, coastal sage scrub, and riverine marsh habitat that would ensure unobstructed access for dam operations, be cost effective to maintain with the limited operations and maintenance funds we have, but also provide a sustainable environment for local wildlife. So the very vocal and genuine distress from the Sepulveda Basin Wildlife Area Steering Committee, and especially the San Fernando Valley Audubon Society, made clear to us that they were not aware of the timing and extent of the Corps' vegetation management project. These groups expressed that they were left out of the public comment process, that the project's master plan and environmental assessment were inaccurate and misleading. It was at our first on-site meeting with our partners. I believe it was 27 December. That was the date the Times was there and ran their story. That the Audubon Society asked if we'd consider halting activities until we had a chance to meet to discuss our further efforts. We gave them our word and made the decision to halt work that day. True to our word, we didn't resume work until Tuesday of last week, after meeting several times, culminating with an on-site nature walk with several of the groups on the 12th of February. And I've been asked, I believe by you, sir, to go into some detail on this event. So as I'm sure most are aware, environmental conservation is a part of every action that the Corps undertakes. We've come to value and respect the passion and breadth of knowledge of our environmental partners. And nowhere was this more evident than on the 12th when Colonel Toy and key Corps staff were joined by members of the Sepulveda Basin Wildlife Area Steering Committee, the San Fernando Valley Audubon Society, the California Native Plant Society, and Friends of the LA River for about a 3-hour walk in the Sepulveda Dam Basin. They led us on a tour and described the value of the local wildlife habitation from their perspective, and later that day we discussed details of the Corps' resumption of work and the beginnings of a joint vision of the project's end state. So the concurrence from environmental groups on resumption of Corps work followed receipt of a second letter we received from the Regional Water Quality Control Board that indicated their encouragement of continued efforts on the project. The Water Board was concerned that the fallen but not removed vegetation posed a risk that could result in runoff to into the LA River. So at the end of the nature walk, Colonel Toy and the environmental stakeholders agreed to the following: that our operations and maintenance crews would soon resume the vegetation management work that began last December. We would continue work on 19 February to include chipping of felled tree limbs and spreading a mulch in the upland area using a backhoe and excavator to minimize the impacts. And then, depending on the time remaining, before the start of the nesting season, estimated then to begin in mid-March, our biologists and native plant experts from the Sepulveda Basin Wildlife Area Steering Committee would also identify and mark non-native trees for removal. We also agreed that we would work together on the following. We'd collaborate on vegetation to be replanted to ensure a more diverse palette while also preserving sustainable habitat for maintenance. We would relook our project phasing to conduct the herbicide and replanting phases together. And we were asked to consider restoring Pothole Pond back to its original condition. We're analyzing this. Though the pond hasn't had water in it since April of last year, substantial water. And though the city hasn't provided water to the pond from Tillman Plant in quite some time, we have some reservations that if the city decides to restore water flow, reclassification of the pond as a wetland may impact our ability to fund its maintenance. Again, we're looking at this.
Okay.
So the big day to resume work with all parties present ended pretty anticlimactically. The Corps was poised to resume work last Tuesday, but decided to halt work again after finding pervasive nesting of song sparrows and other birds in the vegetation we had matted but not removed. So now the only work there that we're doing is limited to the installation of erosion control measures. We notified environmental group stakeholders that the installation of erosion control would resume last Friday. It did. However, the actual vegetation management work that we were doing will not resume again until the end of the nesting season, which is anticipated to be late September, early October.
Okay. Well, thank you, sir.
Yep. Yes, sir.
That concludes. Yes. Mr. Van Dorp, anything else to add?
Sir, no additional comments to make.
Bring the mic closer to you.
Councilman, no additional comments to make at this time, but I'm available, as with Colonel Deraney, to answer any questions and answers from the committee or the public.
Okay. Thank you. Sir?
Good afternoon, Adel Hashkhalil from the Bureau of Sanitation, City of Los Angeles. with me here today, I have Deborah Dietz and Wing Tam and Shram Karagani could not join us, but they're working very closely with the stakeholders on behalf of the city and the Army Corps of Engineers on understanding what happened and also how we move forward. But let me give you kind of a update what we've done and where we are, and hopefully talk about how we move forward. And I've been working closely with the commander and the deputy commander and the deputy district engineer on how we move forward in a collaborative way. Since the last meeting, we've held a number of meetings with the Corps, and also we met with the local community groups, environmental groups at the site. But also we held two public meetings that were held February 14th, well attended by the community, but also by the Regional Water Quality Control Board at that meeting. I think what we have heard is, I think there's a lot of challenges or interests by different groups. The Army Corps expressed their interest in making sure that they have access to perform the maintenance on the dam and providing flood protection. But also the community groups and environmental groups want to have more diverse habitat. At the same time, also the Regional Water Quality Control Board and the city sanitation are interested in making sure that what we have does not impact the water quality in the LA River, such as erosion and pesticides and herbicides. Whatever is put in does not wash into the LA River, because that's a water quality issue. I applaud the Corps for their openness and working with the community. And the biggest concern that we had, I think that's being addressed, is the erosion potential that can go to the river. I think what we are recommending is that we come together, all of us, and we can help facilitate that, working with the Army Corps and the community groups on looking at what can we do to work and have these interests come together and be met. And I think we understand the constraints that we all have, but I think we can come to an agreement, a consensus. And we're willing to take that and lead that and have that discussion between now, I would say over the next 3 months, develop a plan that will be accepted by the community, accepted by the Corps, of how we move forward to restoring the area in a way that can be productive. I think the stabilization, I think, is critical right now. I think that's the key thing that's being done, but how we move forward. And we're willing to work on how we bring everybody together. We have to come up with a consensus. We have to have compromises. We have to bring the Water Quality Control Board into the picture to ensure that their process is part of this consensus building. It's not independent. It's not an enforcement kind. It's actually built into the process.
Right.
Along with the fishing games, and all of them have to come together and have an agreement. There's maybe things we can work to ensure that if the pothole pond is restored, that we can ensure there's certain things that can be put in place to relieve the Corps of Engineers from requiring them to do certain things while maintaining their ability to do flood control maintenance. I think we have a plan that we can start working on together. I'm going to have a meeting with the Corps on Wednesday to kind of work on a plan of how we reach out and develop over the next few months on a plan forward and a restoration. And we're able to see if there's resources that's available within the city that we can help, whether it's to bring water from the Tillman Water Reclamation Plant, etc. But I think we're willing to do that and move forward. The other thing that we heard from the community is also there's a second part, which how can we prevent this from happening in the future? And I think that's something we can continue also working on. But what we heard is, the participation in the Sepulveda Wildlife Steering Committee is critical. Having a presence from the Corps there, along with the Sepulveda Basin Recreational Committee. But also we have the LA River Cooperation Committee that meets regularly. David, you're part of it. That we ensure that all these information is shared at that committee.
Gotcha.
So I think that place can be put. So I think what we have done is we've gathered a lot of information from regional board, from the community groups, from the Corps, from fishing games, and we're trying to bring everybody together and now move forward to agree how we can do a restoration that can meet all the interests and do not impede or cause challenges in meeting some of the goals that each of the stakeholders and the Corps has. So I think we have a good plan, and my continue to work with the Corps and the community groups of moving forward.
First, I want to say it's a very comprehensive approach. I know a lot of this is about communication and understanding. I think it's key to addressing very complicated issues like this, especially when you have so many different perspectives. So I appreciate what you just said it now. I do want to recognize Adrian Vasquez, who's here with Senator De Leon's office, and thank you for joining us, sir. Appreciate that. Councilor Barnes, we can move into public comment at this time, then we're going to answer questions.
The biggest key is to not let it happen again, unfortunately, and then to have the mechanism so there's some checkpoints. And I know everybody tried, no one wanted this to happen, but there was a lot of, and other factors too, as far as there's situations from other agencies that wanted to see something done. So thank you. It's not been pleasant for anybody, but through this challenge, we could make a better day.
Well, don't go too far. Let's go through public comments, and maybe we'll ask you back. Okay?
Sir, if I can address that one comment,
Yeah.
I can say that we've already taken internal controls into account, and so we're looking at those things. Bottom line was, we didn't even follow some of our best practices that we normally do, and so we are making sure that we have a more solidified way of guaranteeing that those best practices stay in place.
Great. Well, thank you, sir. I'd like to call up, if I may, Dave Westhoff. I'd like to come up to grab a seat. Also, Chris Olenkamp and Marion Dodge, if you're still here. Marion? Come on up, grab the third microphone here. Mr. Westhoff.
Dave Weesoff, Weeshoff, President of San Fernando Valley Audubon Society. And first and foremost, I would like to congratulate the Corps and Lieutenant Colonel Duraney for a very accurate representation of the events taken since the our last meeting with you.
Yes.
We are very enthusiastic and optimistic in our working relationship with the Corps over the last few weeks, et cetera.
Right.
And I think that really speaks very highly, candidly, very highly of the Corps. We have, since the January 28th meeting, we have participated in a couple of meetings with the Army Corps of Engineers, one of which is that February 12th walk throughout the basin where, as Lieutenant Colonel Duraney mentioned, was very, very productive. Gave us a good time just to walk, to discuss, to observe, to learn how the community groups have been involved in the preservation and restoration activities for 30-plus years in the southern area of the Sepulveda Basin Wildlife Area. Our commitment to that and the importance of it as a living in nature reserve that is evolving as they do in towards a fully native habitat, and the many, many years it takes for that. And so, of course, we were very distressed that habitat was crushed, but what's, if you will, done is done, and there's no going back. And so now the question is moving forward. We've had a couple of meetings with the Corps, as I mentioned. On February 19th, the plan was, as mentioned, that we would resume very moderate levels of work based on, perhaps you remember the charts that Colonel Toy had there a while ago, but basically to grind up and mulch anything that would be hazardous to dam operations. But considering the fact there were birds nesting in that, very much to their credit, the Army Corps pointed that out and said we're going to cease operations. However, and rightfully so, they have said subsequently, in the event of a 100-year storm or something like that, where some of the heavy logs and things like that might represent a danger, then of course all bets are off, and they're going to have to go out, regardless of nesting birds, and make certain that the dam operations are not compromised. And certainly that's to be respected. So that was February 19th. On February 21st, we had a meeting. This is about 20 people, approximately 10 from the Army Corps and 10 from various civic organizations in the community, Los Angeles, San Fernando Valley Audubon Society, Encino Neighborhood Council, California Native Plant Society, Sepulveda Basin Wildlife Area Steering Committee, the Sierra Club, the Brad Sherman's office, all participated in about a 3-hour meeting to focus on the go forward. Where are we going? How are we going to get there? Once again, I will suggest the Army Corps reached out a hand of friendship, and they bought the coffee and the donuts, which of course establishes a very working relationship. And
Keep
from
the
that
conversation lively.
it always worked.
Okay.
And don't go there with the apple fritters. Just wonderful. And we had a very good dialogue, and then came conversation. I will put it that way. We split up this rather large problem into about 11 different subsets so that we wouldn't all have to participate in all meetings, including the vegetation issues, including the public policy on homeless issues, including NEPA and the et cetera, broken up in 11. And so that's kind of where we are now. The Corps agreed that basically anything we do from this point on is very, very likely to require a new environmental assessment. In other words, we are moving so far away from the original plan that it looks like a new plan, and so that will then immediately cause a 30-day public comment period to go into effect when those plans are in place. And so I think we're pretty comfortable with that, although I think maybe there's some additional discussion as to whether that's the case, but pretty much we think that that's, and I want to say that kind of the good news is that we do have until September to kind of put everything together, and I think we can do that in that time frame. Let's see if there's anything else I would bring to you. I think that some of these issues are going to require a greater level of community participation in the long-term implementation of that plan, whether that include such things as replanting of vegetation and bringing together our army of volunteers or some such. And so in the past, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has signed with National Audubon a memo of understanding which establishes a relationship between community groups, specifically in this case, the National Audubon Society and the Army Corps. Now, they've done this, for example, along the Mississippi River and things like that. And so we're somewhat, and by the way, Colonel Toy himself brought this MOU related to the Mississippi to our attention, to his credit, because I think, again, this could establish a framework by which we bring all the community groups working together with a clear understanding, absolves the Corps of doing things that aren't necessarily in their skill set, if you will, and brings the community involvement, and so, et cetera. So I think that that's sort of our vision of how the longer-term issues can be resolved and community can be more involved. So I would say, and I'd like Chris, our conservation chair, to spend a few minutes, if necessary, just to get. But we're.
I was going to ask him to speak next, but I did want to say to you, thank you for your advocacy and the spirit that I'm sensing here, given the presentation of Army Corps and your observations and Adele's recommendation and this collaboration will stimulate, I believe, a series of understandings that get us to the next level of implementation, because we are dealing with preservation of our wildlife while dealing with the public safety issues as well, and it's a balancing act we have to achieve. So, but I thank you for your advocacy there. Mr. Olenkamp.
Okay, I'm Chris Olenkamp. I'm Conservation Chair of the San Fernando Valley Audubon Society, and I'll probably be much more succinct and probably less tactful than Dave was. But I do want to say to Lieutenant Colonel that I was very impressed by his comments. That does show that they have evolved in this process, and I think we're all moving forward. For me, I'm very frustrated at the pace of moving forward, but that's probably as much my fault as theirs. And I do look forward to our next meeting with them, where hopefully we will get down to details about the restoration proposals and providing them with alternatives that they can study and come back with. But there is one major stumbling block that I would like to bring to the council's attention, and that is an engineering technical letter that they refer to in this environmental assessment and this project. And we don't believe that that technical letter even applies in this case, because it is specifically for dams, levees, embankments, berms, and other appurtenant structures. And their project did not affect directly any of those items. It affected only the floodplain itself. The problem with this technical letter is that it encourages the management or removal of vegetation that could provide habitat for endangered species, so that they do not get established on core properties. And we feel that that is a bad policy to follow, particularly in areas where it doesn't even apply. Now, this policy is being challenged in federal court at the current time, and that's another reason not to insist upon the implementation of this policy, which they seem to be doing. And that policy, if it can be applied in this case, could also be applied anywhere along the Los Angeles River. So it does make me question their commitment to environmental stewardship. So that is still one issue that's going to need hashing out.
Okay.
But we are moving forward, and we are negotiating. We have developed relationships where we can get down to details.
Well, in all my years as a councilor, the one term I believe in is a creative tension, and that allows us for the kind of dialogue that we need to have to get to solutions. So hopefully this collaborative effort that Adele has referred to with the stewardship of everyone here, we can get to a place where we can achieve that balance. Very good. Thank you, sir.
Marion Dodge, Friends of Griffith Park. Friends of Griffith Park would like to thank Councilmember Labange for the motion to look into what happened here at Sepulveda Basin. Unfortunately, the destruction of the habitat there is a prime example of why it is so important to conduct a properly noticed EIR before embarking on such a project. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for attending the committee and your patience as well. So, Councilor, as part of our actions, and it's a reflection of the good work that's already been stated, but it summarizes the direction we can take as a committee is, one, request that Army Corps work with sanitation, Bureau of Sanitation, to come to a collaborative agreement that meets their needs, the community's concerns, and regional water quality responses. Sanitation can be the lead and also provide support for all the parties so that mitigation plan for the next phase is well received, which is, I believe, we heard from Adele. Second, to request that the Corps work with sanitation to accomplish this initiative, and we did say request. Ask parties to come back with a plan in 4 to 5 months that speaks to a coordinated effort. And lastly, move this motion forward with the new instructions to the City Council. And that will be the directive of this committee.
The only question I make, when we have a developer, you get a notice and they give you a notice to say, these are 5 places to send a public notice out. The San Fernando Valley Audubon Society, the Sierra Club San Fernando Valley Chapter, the Friends of Sepulveda Basin. If you had that listed, and maybe in the Los Angeles Daily News or the Los Angeles Times, may be just helpful. Information is knowledge is power. If you give the people the information, possibly it avoids that. So that's just one, what would you call a friendly amendment?
Okay.
I got someone who's probably not friendly right now. They're waiting for me from 4:15 in the office. Could I run out of here?
Please do. That way you can get to your appointment. Anybody here for public comment? Seeing none. Again, thank you all. Mr. Weesoff, Mr. Van Dorp, thank you so much. And Lieutenant, we voted, and that is the action of this committee. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, Lieutenant.